Think of Bonnie, Scotland, and the mind conjures up images of bagpipes, kilts, and breathtaking scenery, but the reality is grim. Violence meted out on the streets of Glasgow has resulted in the city having the highest murder rate in Western Europe. But it wasn't always so. Back in the 1940s, 50s and 60s, villains like Glasgow's first Godfather, Walter Norval, attempted to go about their unsavoury business whilst adhering to a now redundant code.
So how did you sort of descend into crime?
I was in the early age when I was young, as I say. My ma was never about, and I got into a wee crowd of pals, and we started off, as I say, just breaking windows and that, and stealing out the windows and that, you know. But when the war came, it was a canter because it was a blackout then. But this time the police knew who we were. You know, they used to chase us away for the corners and that. But they actually knew who was behind it all, you know. It was our wee mob that run about together. And while the blackout was on, you could break a window, you know, and people were never bothered when they heard the noise like that. They were stealing tea and sugar. It was all rationed. They used to sell it to the bookmakers because they used to buy anything off you. Everything was rationed. So we got tea and sugar and things like that. That was the main things. If we were lucky, if we could get eggs, you only get one egg a month on the rations. So if we get a wee case of eggs and that, well, the bookie gave you a fortune for it.
After several short terms of imprisonment, Walter's career accelerated from committing petty crime to being involved in more serious matters.
This time I'd done a couple of sentences, you know, wee ones. And I met people from Govan and that, boys that knew people and that, you know. And we decided that we'll start trying something like this. So we found out, we used to, let's say, go and watch places. And then we'd hit them. We started off maybe, there were a watchman run this place, used to sit in this place, and the wages used to get delivered to him. So we decided to watch when the wages get delivered, and we sat in a car up the road and we watched it. And we saw the wages get in. There was only the man in the place with a big tray of wages. So we hit that first and we got them. And it was so easy. I said, oh, this is better than in. So we just started then planning wee robberies and hitting banks and different things. It went from one to another, you know. And the wee gang got together. But they were all from different districts. I used to, you know, one of the gang would maybe say, so-and-so's a game boy and he's looking for a bit of pie. And so they'd bring him up. But this time I got a flat in the Willowbank Crescent, a 3-room and kitchen. And we used to meet there. And we'd be sitting there and we used to discuss what we were going to do next. So one of the boys would maybe, I'll let him take my place, Walter, you know, and I'd let him get a bit of pie out of it. And you know, everybody was getting a wee wage.
The more successful Walter became, the more resentment he attracted from his fellow villains.
I was in the house one day, me and the wife, and I had a good drink, mate. It was a Friday night. And the door went, and it was Wally White. And see Tony Queen, the bookmaker, his wife was staying with Tony White, with Big Wally White. Big Wally White was a British welterweight champion. You maybe heard of him. And he came for the district, so he came up to see me. And Queen's wife was with him. And this guy was with him. Big guy built like yourself. Gibson. And he landed near road, and 2 weeks before I was watching him, he was fighting 3 guys outside the pub at Marlin, and he was batting for 3 of them. And I made a saying to the wife, oh God, look at him, I said, he's a big tearaway. And I was well known on the road. I'm saying to myself, hope I don't have to tackle him. But sure as Christ, that night, through the drink, I fell asleep. And my wife woke me up. She says, Walter, going to put him out. And I looked, and Big White had left with his wife, with Queen's wife. And this big is stood at the door, and I says, I looked through, and I had a good drink, mate. Then he come round, and I says, come on, you need to go away. And he says, put me out. I says, come on, don't act it. I says, come on, out you go. He says, well, I heard you could fight. He says, I always wanted to try you out. And I looked at him, and I still wasn't sober. I says, okay, let's do it. I said, but down the back. So we went down the stair, and the way down the stair, I made a bloomer. I walked in front of him. And when we got down to the third flat, he kind of jumped me for the back, and I've been doing that, hit this woman's doorstep with my forehead, but I turned to her quick and he was trying to jump on me. And we started to fight. I had a blade in my back pocket. I'd just slipped out before I went down the stair. And we rolled about for a while, you know, and then I got and tapped him. And I started, and he had his hands over his eyes. But this time my wife had started screaming, and a parliament had run out, stayed up there, just dived out. He was pulling me off him, but I was trying to take his eyes out, you know, stabbing him in the face.
It wasn't long before he met up with Gibson again. Both men knew they had unfinished business.
I was playing dominoes in the pub, and Big Wally West for Postal came in. He was a big hard man for Postal. He says, "Walter, watch yourself." He says, "Gibson's up there with three-handed." He says, "They're looking for you." He says, "They've got knives that length." I went, "Oh." So I was playing dominoes with two pals of mine. Donkey White and John Harris. They're dead, the two of them. But I was playing dominoes. So I finished the game and I got up and I walked out, and Donkey came out the back of me and says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to see him." He said, "Wait, we'll go." I said, "No, you just keep at it." I said, so we walked up anyway, and then John came up. I know John Harris. And I looked at the door, and there was the big and Stone with his pals. I didn't give him time. I just walked in quick. I said, "You're looking for me?" Turned and stuck it right in his neck. Before he had a chance, I stuck it 3 times in his chest. And this time he's trying to get away, and he's staggering away into a corner. So I just went after him, and he turned his back and got down. I'd done his 2 kidneys, stuck it in the back of his head. This time I heard the woman screaming. I blew up. I was only in the back of the bar. And I just got up and I walked away, and I went out to his pals. I said, "What about you?" They all walked away and all. So we just went and jumped a taxi. We went to my mother's, and I gave John, I said, "Get rid of that knife." Next thing I heard that the murder squad was out looking for me. He was supposed to have died in the ambulance. But he died there, but they brought him down again.
Walter's criminal career came to an abrupt halt when he and his gang were arrested following a tip-off from a police informant. People loyal to Walter tried to derail the prosecution case against him by blowing up the courthouse where his trial was being held.
What was the purpose of blowing
Well,
the court up?
the people I met that knew something about it, I knew nothing about it. But the people that I know that did know about it, I think it was the people that actually done it. They explained to me that all the evidence was kept the day before underneath in the High Court. And they used to say it's down in places underneath the High Court. But there was 2 High Courts, and there was one on each side, the south and the north. So as far as I heard that the guys that was interested in doing it was going to hit the 2 of them. And that's what they done. They hit the 2 courts, but the fire brigade got there. Actually, I heard that they were a dog barton. It drew the attention of people to the fires burning inside the court, and that's what saved the evidence for getting all done in. Because the flare would have went through. It seems it was they firebombed it with petrol and all that, you know, and these petrol bombed and the whole place was on fire. They tried us in a burnt court, the finish up.
Before the evidence had been destroyed, there'd been no case against you?
It was a walkout. Everybody was walking out. Even we friends that I know that was in for the same thing, we Manson and him, their stuff would all went and all.
Another major player in Glasgow after the war was Arthur Thompson. By the 1950s, Thompson and his brothers had embarked upon a life of crime working as bouncers, debt collectors and extortionists. If Walter Norval was the unofficial godfather of Glasgow, Arthur was undoubtedly the undisputed king of pain. He's said to have crucified those that refused to repay their debts by nailing their hands and feet to floors and doors.
Earlier in life, Arthur was getting a wee bit of pay off bookmakers and that, and a certain family was nipping in and trying to be abusive to the bookie. And the bookie told Arthur. So Arthur saw them in a van that's taken along the road, and he flew after them in the car, and he ran them off the road. And in the course of it, one of the chaps got killed. They ran into a post, and one of the chaps got killed. So the way it worked out, there was a bit of retaliation. Arthur was used to have a habit and go out in the car, but he didn't drive the car. There was another wee guy who used to drive him. And this day, the wee guy didn't turn up. I don't want to mention names, you know, the wee guy's alive. And Arthur had to drive the car, and his mother-in-law decided she wanted a run. Don't need to tell you, switched on the engine, there were a bomb under the passenger seat. The woman was killed. Arthur broke his 2 legs and got bad injuries in his legs. The woman, innocent woman, and she was killed, but it was meant for Arthur.